Hey guys, Ramsey here. Welcome to another video. Today we are going to review one of the all-time great fragrances. This is right up there as far as I'm concerned with Chanel No. 5, Guerlain Shalimar, Houbigant's Fougère Royale, just some of the all-time classic greats. But for some reason, it doesn't get talked about with those fragrances. It always gets sort of pushed aside. And I think the reason is that this house kind of did the Stuka dive bomber directly into the side of the mountain in the 1960s and sort of reinvented themselves as a drugstore, cheapy, sort of oil house that is a distributor for brands like Calvin Klein and, you know, stuff like that. And that's the house of François Coty, okay? But before the 1960s, they were one of the premier brands, if you will. François Coty was really one of the trailblazers in the world of perfume. It's a house that I would love to go back and get to smell more of his original early work, the true vintage bottles. And I'm going to show you, so I'm going to spray myself again because I want a fresh spray for this review. But this is a sample from an actual 1920s bottle of Coty's Emeraude. And you can see it literally says 1920s bottle right there. This is from Rachel. Rachel is a connoisseur of perfume, and if it wasn't for her, there's a lot of fragrances that I never would get to smell. Let me show you the color. So this is literally 100-year-old juice, and it's just, oh my god. I mean, let me give you a quote, okay? This quote is going to sum up sort of where my head is with this fragrance better than I ever could. The quote says, "We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and to know the place for the first time." T.S. Eliot. So the reason why that quote came into my head when I'm wearing Emeraude is because if you know anything about my past and how I basically got to be the fragrance lover that I am today, you'll know that there is a very special fragrance that really ignited, kickstarted a lot of my exploring, okay? And that fragrance is Shalimar. And I've got multiple different types of bottles. This is a 1980s Parfum de Toilette. This is a current modern eau de parfum and like a refill, if you will. You can see the dent I put in this. I love the eau de parfum. I love the Parfum de Toilette. They're two of my all-time favorites. I also have some vintage eau de toilettes. This is a vintage Shalimar eau de toilette, which I absolutely love. This came from the Duck Den, Rich Mitch. And I've got this 80s Shalimar eau de toilette in this presentation right here. And of course, I also have the Pure Parfum. The Pure Parfum is right here. Nope, that's Val de Nuit. This is Shalimar. So this is the Pure Parfum of Shalimar. This is, I want to say, maybe 20, 25 years old, this particular one. Just all of them are absolutely amazing. But Shalimar is like one of those fragrances that opened the door for me. It's one of those fragrances that when I first smelled it 3 or 4 years ago, my entire sort of outlook on perfume changed. Everything that I thought I knew, completely out the window, right? And it was kind of one of those fragrances that kind of let me restart, start again. It was like I was born, it was like I was baptized in the perfume world when I smelled Shalimar. And Emeraude is sort of, so the slogan for Emeraude is the jewel fragrance, okay? And for me, this is one of the most beautiful experiences in all perfume. For me, personally, as a fragrance lover. Sometimes you just come across a fragrance that like touches your soul, right? And if you know my taste, like I said, Shalimar is vital to my journey. It's a very personal fragrance to me. It's one of the first women's fragrances that I really sort of, you know, this and Mitsuko are two that really kind of like opened my eyes to not being so stoic in my thinking of perfumery and trying things like opium and, you know, Teatro alla Scala and all these different feminine targeted fragrances, which I never would have tried before. Things like Epic Woman, which you won't be able to see right there. And these women-targeted fragrances all come from trying Shalimar for the very first time for me, right? And the first time I got a chance to smell this, first thing that came to my mind is, I've got a 2-3 hour dry down right here, and the fresh spray, oh man, it's, the first thing that came to my mind the very first time I smelled this is that this is a greener Shalimar, okay? And that green, maybe I'm being a little bit influenced by the packaging and the name Emeraude, right? But the very first thing that I thought of when I smelled this is that this is a oak moss heavy version of Shalimar. And if you know sort of my routine, I like to smell the fragrances before I begin looking at the note listing and all that good stuff, right? So I smelled this and wore it to bed last night, and I instantly texted Rachel and said, wow, this is unbelievable stuff. Like, how have I never smelled this before? Number one. Number two, she sent this to me like a year ago. So I've just been like sitting on it all this time, which I will do until sometimes I just kind of switch gears and decide now the time is right to discuss it. And that's how it is going with Emeraude. Now, I must warn you that while Shalimar is still seen as like a, you know, luxury fragrance, and it's well kept by Guerlain, it's sort of the crown jewel of Guerlain to me. And it's a top 10 fragrance of all time for me as far as Shalimar goes. Emeraude has gone through many different versions. It's been repackaged, it's been cheapened, it's been reformulated. The new bottles of Emeraude you can literally find on Amazon for $14, $15, right? And so if you just go buy the new version of Emeraude, Coty's Emeraude, which it is still available from my understanding, the vintage Parfum is discontinued, and I believe that's what this is. I think this is the vintage Parfum. But correct me if I'm wrong, Rachel, in the comments. But the current version of Emeraude has been changed, okay? So that's the first thing I have to mention, is that if you just go buy the current version of Emeraude, you may not be smelling the same thing that I'm smelling from this 1920s bottle. To think that this is 100-year-old juice and it still smells like this, oh, what impeccable condition this is kept in. The other thing I should mention is Francois Coty's great-granddaughter. I can't remember. I'm sorry, forgive me, but I can't remember exactly where she falls in the lineage. But she founded a brand, okay? And her name is Veronica Coty. So you can see her name right there. So this is a fragrance called Sportuno 1921. And if you kind of get the feel of this whole packaging right here, the green reminds you instantly of Emeraude. The year 1921 is the year Emeraude was literally released. You can kind of see her slogan is very similar to the Coty Eagle. I'm not sure if it's exactly the same or if she made some changes for her own brand, but she actually got Christopher Sheldrake to create this to the exact specifications of the original Emeraude, okay? So I'm going to review this too one of these days. If you are into translating stuff, you can kind of try to read that and translate it. That's the little blurb on Sportuno 1921. So thank you, Rachel, for sending me these very precious drops. Very excited to dip into this and see how close this truly is. So it's a modern creation. And this is actually a new house for Veronica Sportuno Coty is her house, if I'm not mistaken. And so I'm very excited to see how a modern creation with the original formula, because she has access to the formula because she's basically family, turned out. And a master perfumer like Christopher Sheldrake with unlimited budget materials, how close it is to the original Emeraude, okay? So, when I first smelled Shalimar, obviously, you know, for me, it's like smelling something that I assumed was one of the most amazing fragrances in the history of the fragrance world, okay? And you have to understand that there's a lot of brands nowadays that riff off of other brands, and clone houses are kind of a big conversation point. There are some people that love clones. There are some people that hate clones. There are some houses that people think are clone houses that sell their fragrances for $500 a bottle, right? Some people think Roja is a clone house. And, you know, he creates stuff like Danger, Pour Homme Parfum, which if you've ever smelled Heritage, Guerlain's Heritage, you will instantly get the comparison between these two. Instantly, right? And many Rojas have a little bit of a Guerlain, you know, lean, right? And so what's interesting, though, is when I first smelled Heritage, I thought this was one of the most unbelievable, unique, amazing fragrances I've ever smelled in my life. And I ended up calling this like an amber fougere, but I'm going to review this one of these days. This is my favorite masculine Guerlain of all time. Heritage is for me, it's my masculine Guerlain, right? Although Abbey Rouge is a damn close second. The EDT, the original EDT, but Heritage for me is, and then of course you have things like Lidge, and there's other masculines, Vetiver, which are just absolutely amazing. But really, when you get to know this genre, you know that there's actually a lot of fragrances that came before this that are very, very similar to this. If you've ever smelled Etienne Eigner's Free Life, if you've ever smelled Zino by Davidoff, you'll know that Zino by Davidoff has some similarities to Guerlain's Heritage, right? And so for then Roja to come out and put out a fragrance that kind of smells like this years and years later doesn't seem so strange when you think about the fact that even Shalimar, Guerlain's crown jewel, if you will, has a huge similarity to Emeraude. In fact, if this would have said Shalimar from a 1920s bottle, I would have been like, this is the most amazing thing I've ever smelled. You know, it's... But the fact that it says Emeraude, it completely blows my mind, right? That's something so similar. And I've read some articles where some people say, oh, it's not that similar, there are differences. And maybe if you're smelling the newer Emeraude, that's true. But this version in the 1920s bottle is so similar, it's shocking. Absolutely shocking to me. This has shaken me to my core, to be honest with you. So let's get back to how it smells. So if you have smelled Shalimar with that big burst of bergamot, almost metallic bergamot, shimmery metallic, you know, I think bergamot in Shalimar is like 30% of the concentration. And bergamot is a very expensive ingredient, actually. Some people think that, oh, it's a citrus note, it's a throwaway note. It's not. It's a big part of the formula when it comes to Shalimar, which really makes me think that this classic version of Emeraude also makes up a big portion of it. You know, the bergamot in the top. But somehow, when I went to go look at the note listing, I realized there's no oak moss. So it can't just be extra oak moss, although I do feel like there's still some in there, even though it's not listed. I do feel like there's some oak moss in there because it has a very textured feeling to it. But I noticed that there's a note of lemongrass listed, okay? And I could totally see lemongrass in here. Normally, lemongrass gives off this sort of hippie-like vibe, right? Here, it's completely different. It's like just the right amount of lemongrass used to give this herbaceous, slightly earthy, fresh, green tint to the DNA. And in my mind, I want to say to the Shalimar DNA. But actually, this came out in 1921. Shalimar came out in 1925. So it's not the Shalimar DNA. It's the Coty Emeraude DNA that, and if you know the story of Shalimar, the story goes that Jacques Guerlain was basically experimenting with Jicky, okay? So he was experimenting with his father, Aimé Guerlain's creation, Jicky, and he dumped a bunch of a new material called ethyl vanillin into the compound. He dumped too much in and created this amazing fragrance called Shalimar. Now, that story of dumping too much in is very, very similar to Henri Robert creating Chanel No. 5 and just accidentally dumping in too much of the aldehydes in the top, right? But, so it's a very similar story, maybe used many times throughout the early fragrance years. But I could see it, but on the other hand, it feels like a marketing story to me, especially now that I'm smelling Emeraude. In fact, there are some stories going around that say that Jacques Guerlain's wife wore Emeraude, and he was so jealous he had to try to make a Guerlain version of it, because nobody does a Guerlain like a Guerlain, right? So, so getting back to the smell, okay? So, of course, when you think about that green tint to Emeraude, that lemongrass or oak moss or whatever you want to think of. I don't think it's anything like Artemisia or, you know, lemongrass I think is an interesting note to say is in here, because it gives off this sort of, does give off this lemony vibe. Lemongrass is inherently lemony and fresh. And also that green tint is supposed to be reminiscent of the emerald gem, hence the name Emeraude, right? And the emerald gem is supposed to be a sort of a, how do you say, like a representation of the crown that the fallen angel Lucifer wore. It's supposed to be like a forbidden fruit, if you will, like a forbidden, you know, youth springs eternal, love and rebirth kind of, you know, representation is what the emerald is supposed to represent. But there's also something slightly forbidden about it, because that was seen as Lucifer's gemstone, right? And so apparently this green emerald feel and gemstone in general was very big in the East, in the Far East, specifically India. So if you're thinking India, and if you're thinking Taj Mahal, because of the Shalimar story with the, you know, the emperor and his beloved wife, which I always forget their names, and I don't know why I don't have it up ahead of time. But the story basically goes that the famous emperor, the Mughal Emperor Shah Jahan, and his beloved wife Mumtaz Mahal, you know, she died, and they erected the famous Taj Mahal monument in India to her beauty and memory and all that stuff. And they used to make love in the gardens of Shalimar, and the beautiful story of Shalimar. If you've never heard it, go check it out, right? But the fact that we're linking an emerald, right, that Coty used to India, the Orient, and then, of course, Shalimar comes along with the story of the love story of the Taj Mahal, and giving you this perception of the Orient as well. They're both trying to hint at the Orient while creating an Oriental fragrance. Oh, but I am in love with this DNA. I mean, these two, call it what you will. You know, if I could buy a bottle of this right now, I would. But these two, really, for me, are Oriental vanilla heavy fragrances, right? You know, I think Shalimar is even heavier on the vanilla than Emeraude. I think Emeraude goes a little more in a slightly, you know, it doesn't have as much of the vanilla and the tonka, and of course the Shalimar has that it has that Guerlain, which Coty does not. But there is something, we'll get to the other ingredients as well. But, you know, it does open up slightly spicy and powdery, and I think bergamot plays a big role in the top, right? And so there's a fantastic article, by the way, if you want to learn more about this, if you don't think I'm doing a good enough job explaining it. There's a Fragrantica article that you can kind of go check out that was written on Emeraude. Emeraude's kind of one of those forgotten all-time Hall of Fame fragrances, if you will. It's kind of one of those that no one really talks about. But just imagine this heavy, powdery Oriental that's very rich and dense and opulent and glamorous, right? It has that character about it. It really has this sparkle. Remember, with Shalimar, it was supposed to be, there was an old saying that proper women did not smoke and they did not wear Shalimar, because it was supposed to be too, it was supposed to be seen as being too, like, risque, if you will, right? It was seen as being just way too risque. And in here, there's rose, there's rosewood, there's ylang ylang and jasmine, and then there's vanilla, apopanax, patchouli, ambrine, which is the material inside of ambergris. So just consider that as ambergris, benzoin, and sandalwood, okay? And so the rosewood in here, so this fragrance is just so enchanting. I mean, it's almost literally like putting a spell on me. Is the reason I really wanted to do this review for you guys, because very rarely do you find a fragrance that really almost makes you think, like, everything you know, you thought you knew, you didn't know, right? And that's why in the quote in the beginning, it's like, You go back to the original place you started, but you'll really know it for the very first time. That T.S. Eliot quote is absolutely perfect for this fragrance. So the rosewood in this almost has a little bit of a lavender smell. Even though there's no lavender in here, there's no lavender listed in there, there's a little bit of this lavender, spicy, herbal, like rosewood. And then imagine that the rosewood literally smells like rosy wood. I mean, literally try to imagine like a powdery oriental rosy wood smell. And the rose is there. It's a very deep rose, a very heavy, powdery, shimmery rose. And something slightly animalic lurking underneath. Just slightly, okay? So if you don't like animalic fragrances, you don't have to worry too much about this, but there is a little bit, at least in the version that I'm smelling. I would guess this is like 1960s and before, is my guess. But maybe there's been a reformulation between the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. But I think the 60s is really when Coty fell on hard times and switched strategies. So I'm guessing if you have a bottle pre-1960s, you'll probably be smelling exactly what I'm smelling. But just imagine this animalic castoreum. And the reason I say castoreum and not civet, I know there's a lot of reviews on Shalimar where they say that it's civet. I almost think that it's castoreum, or maybe it's both. Maybe it's civet and castoreum. But in Emeraude especially, I think there's some castoreum in here, even though it's not listed, because castoreum, you know, has been used to give off this slightly leathery aspect, and it adds this unbelievable warmth, almost like this metallic warmth. And remember I said in the top, the bergamot has this slightly metallic tinge to it, along with the powders, right? The castoreum in the base and the apopanax, which is like the sweet myrrh resin, kind of come together to give this unbelievable warmth. And, you know, just imagine like being outside at the Taj Mahal, and you're literally just standing there staring at the monument for so long, you're almost in awe of it, and you're sweating because it's just hot out there, right? You're in India, it's hot, it's the Orient, and so you're just almost sweating through your white, light, you know, shirt that is meant for the heat, but you're just almost just sweating through it because it's so hot, right? Just imagine a little bit of that sweat like cooling on your skin, right? This sort of slightly animalic bit, slightly funk, but covered up by this beautiful powdery oriental vanilla, ambery, benzoin, you know, floral-like smell. And so the fragrance almost seems to like flicker on my skin. This fragrance like flashes. It flickers, it flashes on my skin. And since this is a 1920 bottle, I think this has real nitro musks in here. I don't know, but I've been spraying it on my skin. I don't really care. But it just adds this warm, powdery, ambery shimmer. Just imagine like looking at the Taj Mahal through a heat wave, and you're just seeing it sort of shimmer on the horizon, right? That's the way that the fragrance feels on my skin. I think, like I said earlier, the vanilla, I really don't think it's as overdosed as it is in Shalimar. But nonetheless, to me, this is one of the most high-class vanillas I've ever smelled. So even though, you know, it's not a Guerlain, and Guerlain to me is the epitome of vanilla, I still think that this is one of the best vanilla fragrances I've ever smelled. For me, personally, my taste in vanilla. And, you know, Guerlain is known for having the best vanilla in the world. But this, if this kind of gave them the idea, wow. I mean, Coty really has to be praised. And you know what's crazy is if you go to YouTube and run a search for Coty Emeraude, almost no videos come up. It's like 5 videos from the same girl. And it's like, I wore this fragrance today, and it's like Emeraude, and she did a review on it, and then she put it in a list, and then she, you know, starter orientals, and there's like almost nobody talking about this fragrance, which is crazy to me. And I know it went through that reformulation, and what I'm talking about in here from the 1920s bottle may not be the same thing that you can smell if you just go buy it. But man, I can't believe more people don't talk about this. The real ambergris, of course, in the perfume adds this unbelievable depth. So just imagine a fragrance sitting on your skin and having this depth, this volume. And, you know, it's a jaw-dropping perfume. It's like being in the presence of greatness for me. Just imagine being able to travel back in time and speak with Francois Coty, the man, and ask him about this fragrance. Imagine how beautiful that would be. Like, imagine, you know how in a movie when people travel back in time, like they get knocked out, they travel through the air and the clouds are rushing by them, and, you know, there's this sense of, you know, weightlessness and powderiness and, you know, being up in the atmosphere, right? And that's a little bit how the fragrance feels. You know, there's this atmospheric, shimmery powderiness to it. The patchouli grounds it a little bit, but it's not going to smell anything like any patchouli you've ever smelled before. It's mostly going to be sort of the powdery, shimmery, floral, and, you know, vanilla and resins is mostly what you're going to get. And very fluffy. So imagine like a fluffy, powdery oriental fragrance. Very romantic as well. This is a very romantic fragrance to me. And it really does take me full circle. Like I said, this takes me right back to the beginning with Shalimar. And so that T.S. Eliot quote is absolutely perfect. I couldn't have found a more perfect quote for Emeraude. We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all of our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. Absolutely perfect. So if you've smelled Emeraude, I would love to know your thoughts. I'd love to know your thoughts on the connection to Shalimar. It's absolutely crazy to think that 100 years ago, because this already turned 100, this turns 100 in a couple years, right? It's absolutely crazy to think 100 years ago that the same debate of what we're having with Roja and, you know, Guerlain's Heritage, right? These sort of debates that are going on with Danger versus Heritage versus Mitsuko versus Diaghilev, you know, these sort of debates that are going on could even be applied to the things from the beginning time, right? Because to me, this is almost like Holy Grail. This is like, you know, holding an icon in your hand, like something magical, like a magical artifact, right? And so to question its authenticity by going, well, wait a minute, someone created something before it that was, it's really crazy that it goes back that far. So is there anything truly new in the fragrance world? You know, when it comes to smells, that's the question that I think this sort of raises is there a new smell? Is there a new fragrance that can be created? And if someone creates a fragrance like this, obviously they don't have, you know, copyright rights on it or something because it's a smell, right? Someone else can create it, change one or two things and say it's theirs. And so, you know, our ideas really protected, our smells protected. Is it, because think about the icon that Shalimar became. And Shalimar is the one everyone remembers. Even though this came first, it's Shalimar everyone remembers. This is the quintessential Oriental for me. This is the, you know, shining example of an Oriental. But really, this came first. This came 4 years ago, 4 years before it. And so a lot of debate that this can really bring about. But I wanted to do the video for you guys because I believe Emeraude deserves it. This is such an amazing fragrance experience, and I've enjoyed wearing it to bed the last couple days. So, you know, thank you, Rachel, for sending this my way. Very much appreciate it. Very, very kind of you. And of course, also for sending the Sportuno 1921. I can't wait to smell that and see just how close it is to Emeraude. I love this DNA, so I'm sure I'll love that. So let me know what you guys think of Emeraude. Leave a comment. Love your seeing your faces in the comments. Love the support and feedback and you know, back and forth, that interaction that we have in the comments. So cheers, guys. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.